Out of town. Eric's out of town this week, so I am taking the baton and running. So a couple quick announcements before we jump in. You guys can all access this video and any others from our Zoom meetings at the Kiwanis Club of Indianapolis YouTube channel, pictured on your screen. When you click subscribe, you'll be notified to any new videos that are uploaded each week, so you can keep current on everything that's going on. Our 2022 foundation grant deadline is coming up fast, September 1st, right around the corner. Be sure to share the application with any organizations that you think might be a good fit. Youth Serving, Marion County. And I'd like to thank everyone, all of the Lincoln Fellows and the others who have sent donations to the foundation in honor of Jim Blythe's legacy and the Abe Lincoln Scholarship Program. That was very meaningful to him and will allow him to continue his legacy. We also appreciate all of the members. Thank you to former board treasurer Jeremy Kopech, who is celebrating his 10-year anniversary this week. See Jeremy, tell him congratulations and that we miss him. We need him back on some Zooms. And do we have Greg Silver on the line to introduce Judy O'Bannon? I cannot tell. Okay, so as you can see on your screen, Judy O'Bannon is a former First Lady of Indiana. She's an award-winning TV producer and host. Her resume would be way too long for me to do any justice to, but we will say that she's a community activist and volunteer. She advocates for education, the environment, and community development. She has shared a video with us from a recent presentation. It'll run about 30 minutes, and then she will actually, stars aligning, she will join us on the phone for some Q&A.
Good morning, and welcome to our farm. Sometimes I call it our little piece of heaven. It's just a small patch in southern Indiana. Used to be a pioneer homestead out in the field, and here close we have buildings that were built out of logs in the 1830s. And I'm standing in front of about an 1866 log barn that we now call home. I want to thank you for including me in your conference, because it gives me a chance to also thank you for all you do all year long to bring our attention to environmental matters and cause us to start thinking what we can do about it. It did that for me. Thank you for asking me to get a message here, because I had to bring all my ideas from the past and into the future and see just where I stood. I've even made some cards because I don't want to forget a thing today. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that you're here too. Often people say to me, how long does it take you to write a speech? And I say, it's taken all my life. I think everything that happens up to now, here at the Pioneer Homestead, in my own family, in my own life, all that builds what I am today. It's taken all my life to bring this speech now. My mom was a real gardener. Her most favorite thing in the whole world was her compost pile. And she also would like to walk around when she wasn't gardening and look at the ground and pick up rocks and take them home and label them and look up in her books. Well, even when she was in the Alzheimer's ward, when she got into her 90s, the first thing she'd do when you walked in her room is say, come on, I want to show you something. And she'd take us to the window and she'd show us a great big tree trunk and she'd say, isn't it beautiful? My father was a very good photographer. He shot 16mm movies, and he was a very patient man. He could sit all day and watch a bee pollinate a flower, or get his camera on a bird feeding her nest, or watch a flower unfold in a spring day like today. I have to admit, I wasn't too fond when my mom made me scrape the peelings off the carrots, take it out to the chicken coop and feed the chickens. And I was very aware that many people thought my mom had gone over the line. She was a bit too eccentric. She didn't use chemicals in her gardens, but she had fly swatters all over the place. And when a butterfly would come and land on a plant of hers, she'd smack that thing and get it out of her system. Now, I also knew about the human landscape and environment. I grew up when I was little, the Second World War was going on. And so we had a victory garden. Boy, as a kid was that just a ball. You could go meet your friends after school and play, but it wasn't all play. You got to help plant things and harvest them and feel like you were a necessary part of your family to feed them. We were on rationing stamps for food, you know. But it also made you think, I'm part of the big effort to save this country. The Victory Gardens. When I got married, I moved down here to southern Indiana to Corydon. The town's right in the middle where two creeks meet and floods happen often. Boy, I certainly learned how people can work together when they're trying to get stuff out on trucks from a flood or clean the muck up afterwards. When my deceased husband was elected lieutenant governor, we moved to Indianapolis and we moved right downtown. Now, many people call that a sort of a bad area, scary. I call it in transition. You see, it was a deteriorated inner city, but some people, those urban pioneers, they came in and restored big Victorian houses. Meanwhile, the people who with less means couldn't move so easily. They lived in, well, really pretty bad, subsidized housing in apartments all around us. Now, they got along all right, but they really didn't know each other, and they didn't talk to each other. And the good guys couldn't really get together and figure out what to do with some of the bad actors that were around. And so we built a community garden. It was more about building friendships and trust than it was about feeding everybody and filling up the refrigerators. But we were able to do both of those things. But you know, it wasn't really until I moved out here during the pandemic that I really, in the gut, had that sensation of what it means to be part of the web of life. I appreciated things that were beautiful and different and remarkable since I was a little kid, but to really feel just right inside yourself, you're part of it. Not until Don and I, my husband and I, moved down here to quarantine from the pandemic COVID virus. Now, we're both in the vulnerable group. That means we're old. So we stayed down here all the time, and we went through all the seasons. It's a big barn we live in with great big windows, and you can look out and feel just like you're outside, but you're not cold and you're not wet, and you're pretty comfortable. So you see the seasons go by and how the trees and the plants in the fields, the farmers' plants and the animals, how do they respond to the fact that it's warming up, it's getting spring and everything's blooming? Just like I respond. I get my garden thoughts going and I get enlightened. I could see how that harvesting time of bringing it together, so we had things during the downtime of the winter. And from my windows, I could see a burn pile out the front. Well, I can't tell you how many times I've had to say to people that work here at the farm, do not burn the burn pile. The burn pile is a wonderful habitat for wildlife. Well, during the winter months, we saw all kinds of animal tracks going in there. And could I identify with that kind of housing? We lived in this barn. Every day I look at these great big logs that grew out of the earth. They used the sun and the rain and they grew. And then man came along and they cut them down. And I can see those adze marks on the sides of these hand-hewn logs that show man and nature working together. When I looked out of my burn pile, I could see the same thing. The handyman on the farm had made a beautiful burn pile. And the birds sit on the very top twig every morning, all year long. And the rabbits and the opossum, sometimes the skunk, get in under there and make that their life. I really had a sense of sharing the needs of life that all of God's creation shares. And that is, we need nourishment. We need fulfillment of something to accomplish. We need God's sun and the rain and we need to work together to keep it going. Well, my house in Indianapolis isn't anything like this. In Indianapolis, Donna and I live on a very busy intersection. 4-way stop signs, and nobody wants to stop. So it's something, I don't want to look at that franticness out there. When I looked at the house to buy, I felt encouraged because there were 6 trees, sort of medium height, right on the edge along the street. Surely they would eventually give me shade, they would protect me from the dirt and the fumes of the traffic and the noise. And they were Bradford pears. Yes, you heard me right. They were Bradford pears, and I was glad at the time. You see, for about the 10 or 11 years prior to that, I'd been the chairman of Indiana's Main Street program. We went all over the state encouraging people to revitalize their communities, bring people back together, and bring them into a sense of who they were as a community. And the experts at that time said to me, plant Bradford pears. It's the newest thing going. They can stand the fumes of the cars, they cleanse the air, they grow fast, and they shade your building, and they have beautiful white flowers. Well, when I moved in, I had these 6 Bradford pears along the road. And I realized those things are messy. They've got these little fakey pear things that the birds eat, and then they drop the seeds down all over the sidewalk. But I didn't care. I like trees so much, I was willing to get out the broom and clean it up a little every once in a while. And then one time, during a power outage, the news forecaster said, these power outages on our lines are caused by Bradford pears. They are unstable, and they break off, and they fall on the power lines. So, oh gosh, I didn't know that before. And I ran like a good citizen out, and I looked at my Bradford pears, and was I relieved? None of them was anywhere near a power line, so I certainly did not have to think about it. Now, it didn't enter my mind about the Bradford pears, except, boy, they've really grown since I've lived there in 15 years. And they shelter me from every car going by in every good way. But on April 6th, the Indianapolis Star wrote an article about the bane of the existence of our ecology was the Bradford pear. The Bradford pear is invasive. I realize that. Birds also take those seeds and they just drop them everywhere. So Bradford pears land all over the landscape. And they are so invasive, they push out the native plants. They destroy the habitat for the wildlife that was there. And so we've got to figure out how to get rid of the Bradford pears. Eeks, I called the tree trimming guy, said, would you give me an estimate of what it's going to cost to take out my Bradford pears? And just before I came down here for this conference, I got the estimate, $2,400. And then I figured to replace them was going to cost more. And then what was I going to replace them with? These little things. I'm 86. I'll never see those little things grow to be the big shade providers that my Bradford pears. I got a dilemma, and I'm thinking about it. But you know what happened? A couple days ago on Facebook page on my telephone, a young man that is not an environmentalist, but that I know, forwarded a Sycamore Land Trust article about the Bradford pear. It painted a dark picture of what they do to all the environment. But what really got me is he had written a little poem on the bottom of the big article. And it said, so you didn't know then, but now you know. Cut them down and plant something new. Well, I knew why he didn't like the Bradford pear. Because he's got one of these suburban lawns, it's all beautiful grass, which means to me, you've used pesticides and herbicides to get those dandelions and bugs out of there. And he had to pick up sticks that made a mess on his lawn, and he didn't like it. I'd heard him say that. And then I knew that he had bad allergies, and those white blossoms that looked so good were causing him to sneeze and cough. Now he came at this Bradford pear problem from an entirely different place than you do or I do. I might cast that off and say, well, his motive is self-serving. We don't count him in the cause. We need him. We need voices that come from all over, from all different backgrounds to tell us how we can address and live a healthier life with our environment. Well, we do all come from different backgrounds and see things with different perspectives about what's important. But often we do end up in the same place. Look at my story about the Bradford pear. I was worried really about some of the same things that the man who owns the mining company that mines soft coal was thinking. He's thinking he's going to lose jobs for people in his community, that a whole way of life is going to be gone and it's money in everyone's pockets. I'm worried about that with the Bradford pears, I have to admit. And then we all are faced with the unintended consequences from our acts. Who would have guessed how some of it would have turned out? You know, I remember when Canada geese were not in the cities, and we were so glad when they came into the urban areas because they seemed to get along all right. And then I remembered reading about the ladies that lived along the Broad Ripple Canal there, and they said, they're messing up our yards. We can't go out. We have to get those eggs and throw them away. And there was a question in the newspaper, should those women be arrested? Well, at the same time, I was down here at the farm, and we had a sitting pair of Canada geese on my duck island, and the neighbor boys wanted to go fishing. And I had to say, no, boys, we're not fishing now because Mama Goose is out there, and we don't want to scare them away because we like them on the pond. Who would have guessed? And if you've seen the movie The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman is stepping out of the swimming pool at his graduation party, and his father's business associate looks at him and says, son, remember this, the future is plastics. Well, I remember that scene because it was so darn funny, but who would have guessed what the future with plastics would be? Who would have guessed that millions of marine creatures would die every year because of ingesting pollutants from plastics in the oceans? And who would guess that you and I every week would consume the same amount of plastic that it takes to create a credit card? Who would have guessed? Unintended consequences. And just the other day I read that American and Chinese scientists have created an embryo that is half human and half monkey. And they plan to harvest the organs for organ transplants. Who would have guessed? Major issues that cause us to go to the deepest depths of our belief and our religions. We can't talk about the environment without talking about God, the Creator. God that created all of our bounteous, economic, educational, wisdom, food, health, all of it. It's God's creation. And it's in relationship to us. Think of in the Torah where they write about the covenants God made with land, with man and with land. Think about the Quran where they talk obedience, being obedient to God's creation. And in Christianity, it's full of stories about Jesus proclaiming the good news that you are again reunited by a loving God with all of creation in the reconciliation. Who would have guessed the consequences? Who would have guessed about God's relationship to us? It's all about right relationships. God's bountiful creation can supply everything we need. We can't get in that scarcity trap, thinking that, oh my, there's just so much in this world, and if someone else gets something, I'm not going to get what I need to take care of myself. We need to work from what they call now an assets-based harvesting of talents in our people and in our ecology. Because every one of us has a gift. Even the person that looked like they could hardly get to the meeting, they know something and can contribute to what you're doing as a group. And even the person, they have a gift. And everybody that looks like they've got everything going for them, they've got a need. And it's when we put those gifts and those needs together that we literally feed each other. And we are healed as a community. We don't vilify, we bring along and celebrate. Well, sometimes it just seems so overwhelming. It almost seems like we're talking about the whole cosmos and eternity. Well, maybe we are. And where do we start? Well, I guess we start with ourselves. As God's creature, how do we treat the creation He has called us? What do we do about that? Do I only ingest things that make me healthy, and whether that's good thoughts and good food and nourishing, or what kind of habits or practices do I develop myself that says, I honor this creation that God has made? And then our brothers and sisters, we don't treat them like the other, like competition. How do we treat them like journeyers on the trip with us? Sometimes I think we look at some guidelines from our religious experiences and backgrounds, and we get misinterpretations. I know I felt that way about the word dominion. I remember reading as a kid, it said, oh, God said to people, go and have dominion over the fish and the air and the animals. Well, Carol Johnson, the theologian from Christian Theological Seminary, who specializes in the environment, said the word dominion's changed a bit. The word dominion to her means that you work in concert with God on His creation. You might ask her about that during the questions and answers that follow. Working together with God, working together with His natural creation, not against it. Too often I have the feeling we treat people and situations like paper plates. We think we use, we abuse, and then we discard them. That isn't what the right relationships that we're talking about. When we look to our religious beliefs and traditions, we also see values that it suggests for us. A couple that come to my mind that we probably need to always reevaluate and figure out where we stand on them is profit. You know, we are a country that focuses on profit. What kind of profit am I going to make? Well, we sure need to make enough to feed our families and fuel our engines of economy and keep ourselves all healthy. But profit in itself will not make a sustainable community. Look at that Bradford pear story. I had to give up some profit if I'd get rid of those. The miner in the mining town has to get rid of some of his employees. Manufacturers who say, oh, I'm creating a pollutant, have to weigh values themselves. And what about like social expectations? When I first moved in the governor's residence, I said, nobody's using pesticides or herbicides on this ground while I'm here. And so I said, no chemicals. Well, right after I told that to all the grounds crew that took care of it, I left the country for a week. And when I came back, I was met at the airport by someone who said, oh my gosh, don't you ever leave the first warm day of spring. Because you know those days when the daffodils are blooming, but also the dandelions come up for the first time, and it's like they all came up the same day and covered the whole lawn. That happened at the governor's residence, right along with a whole bunch of irate people calling and saying things like, on Meridian Street, we have pride in how we keep our lawns, and you've got to do something about those dandelions. To other people saying, if you call that the state's living room, don't you have more pride in setting a better example than letting weeds grow in your yard? Well, what did I do? You know, I hate to say, I buckled under it. I buckled under it. I didn't want to be seen as tacky or inadequate to the job. And we didn't have any more dandelions. We also took all the yellow flowers out of the front yard so they not be mistaken for dandelions in the future. I sidestepped and lost the opportunity as a teaching experience to say, come along, together we will figure out how to live in the wilderness and the urban areas, to recreate natural growing places and bring back natural habitat and live together in tandem. Social expectations. I sometimes wonder about golf courses. Look at all that expanse of beautiful, sterile grass. Oh, you got to use chemicals if you're going to make it look like that. And then what do you have to do? You have to use precious water and water extensively. Makes me wonder, why can't we think of a sport that everyone thinks is as fun, relaxing, camaraderie based, sort of socially acceptable, that includes wildlife. David Attenborough, who's produced all those nature documentaries since 1950, says what we need is more wilderness places. Gosh, I remember when one of the neighbors on Meridian Street bought the lot across the street from her, and she naturalized it. She put in flowering plants, but also she put in grasses and trees that were natural. Did she get the phone calls about that? We have to wonder about our social expectations of what we value and think is in or fashionable. And what about time? My own kids have said to me when I talk about recycling, Mom, I can earn more in the 15 minutes it takes me to clean out that plastic thing that I have to take to the recycling company, and I can buy a whole lot more of this used one-time plastic container for vegetables. Time is a value. We're here for a short time and we want to use it well. We don't want to lose opportunities to help be part of God's creation and grow it. But time, we've got to look at it. It's not just use less and recycle. It's use less, reuse, adaptive reuse, repair, and recycle. Well, I'll just speak for Indiana, but sometimes Indiana's not doing very well. I'm afraid to have to admit that we lead all other states in this nation in the degree of pollutants and particles that are bad for you that we emit into the air. That's why when we did our program, the television program, I think it aired here a couple weeks ago for WFYI Public Television on courage, brains, and muscle. I tried to figure out how to address the environment without having a discussion that polarized people. So we didn't want to say, do we think climate change is real? And then people line up on opposite sides and they try to figure out if it's real. And if they decide it's real, well then who caused it? And people are set up in angry mode. And so, same Carol Johnson, the environmental theologian, said to us, let's go around and record people that are doing wonderful things to help save the environment. Everything from, paper straws to automobile plants that recycle everything. I want to say I think I'm a little encouraged now. Let me read you a quote I've got here from the New York Times. It was an opinion writer. He said, maybe stagnating waves, warming world, Hurricane Katrina, pandemic viruses prove there are scarier words spoken than these words. I'm from the government and I've come to help you. Remember the joke of saying, oh, that's the scariest words in the dictionary? Well, maybe when we organize in society, we do have things to offer. Institutions and policies and programs and lists and advisories can be good things. And we need to be in part of developing those. We need government to respond. We need not-for-profits to respond. We need our church groups, our community groups, and our families to all respond. Again, to the Indiana legislature, they still have a few days to serve, but their actions this year on environmental issues have been disappointing. At one time, none of the environmental policies had even been called to a meeting by the House Committee on Environmental Issues. And the chairman of that committee said, this is a session with so much of importance that we didn't have time to get to them. Importance? I think it's of urgent importance. I equate it to, say, in the Second World War. We felt importance. When I was a kid, one of the things that impressed me the most is how the community came together and did it by giving up things and making compromises and working together. Downtown in our little town, down where everybody met by the railroad station, they had a big space of ground. And on it, people would come and throw metal things in there. Good stuff. I would look in there and say, there's good stuff. You ever wonder why there aren't very many of those wrought iron fences left from the Victorian yards in the past? It's because people took up those fences that divided their yards, and they threw them on the common scrap heap to make airplanes, to fight and win for what we thought was important, our democracy and freedom. Well, I worry, does it take a war to unite us? Maybe it takes another kind of war. A war against an unbalanced environment. A war against attitudes that destroy and take advantage of and abuse. Maybe we are ready in our country to be united by a concerted effort to come together and to tackle the problem. We can do that if we care enough. We hear about how we're divided in our country, and some people say, I'm not talking to those folks over there, they think different than I. Remember, we're not in competition. We're in this team together. It's about right relationships with God, with all of God's creation, which includes us and includes others. There's an old saying we've all heard, but is so true. There's just no limit to where we can go when we go together. Let's enter the journey of life together, okay?
I'm here. We're here. Hello?
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
This is Greg.
Hang on
Can you hear
one
me?
sec.
Greg Silver and Judy are here together.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I
Can you hear me?
apologize for that.
Oh, I see a gardener there.
There you are. There you are. We just had a little trouble connecting, and hi, Trina. And we wanted to make sure that Judy could answer some questions about her thoughts that she's given to you today. I'm with her here today, and on social expectations. And I'm going to turn it over to Judy. I just wanted to say that we're so honored to have her with us today, and that it was something that I've known her family for 60 years, maybe.
Yeah.
I know. And because her mother was my den mother in Cub Scouts. So when I write about the crocodile or whatever, it's because of her mom. So here's Judy O'Bannon to answer questions that you might have. Trina, maybe something. And I want to thank her so much for being on today.
Well, I'm going to thank you for including me because I know your organization has cared about community and each other for years and years, and the world's better for it. So thank you for including me.
Judy, you are incredibly inspiring. It's so wonderful to see you looking well and happy. And I'm going to ask you a question, not about what you talked about, but tell the people about that lovely ring that you and Don chose when you got married. I saw it in the film several times, and would you care to share that story?
Well, if you ask me a question, Mark, I can't hear with my hearing aids.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was
And you know,
asking
I
about
suppose
your wedding ring that
I
you
can
had
help you. Talk, Mark, state that again, and I'll kind of state it. Can you hear me all right, Mark?
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, sure.
I can hear you.
Or say that, ask your question again.
The story about your wonderful wedding ring that you and Don chose when you got married. I could see it in the
My
film.
wedding ring story.
Wedding ring
Yes,
story about Don.
that was
Don,
so fun when you told Ann and I about that, and I just like you to share it if you care to.
Well, really, when we were two old guys getting married, in our 80s, and we went to look for a ring. I love old things because really they tell the story of someone else's life, and I feel connected to all of the universe that way for me. So we went to antique stores and we weren't having much luck, and people said, it's because they're melting them down for the gold. I don't want to melt down our environment for the gold. I want to use all that mankind has helped create over the generations, but I think we can do better in that creation. What we found for my ring was $17.50 plus tax. And here you can see it's just sort of what we might think of as a cheesy thing. But this, can you see the symbolism there? It's two little garnets that come together. And we were two families who'd had long lives experiences. We both had long marriages. We had a lot of kids. We didn't come as babes to the woods. We came with stories. And when we had our wedding, I officiated. No one ever would let me much preach in their pulpit, so I had to do my own wedding. We passed it around, and everyone put their mojo on it. I think that's what I'm trying to say about the environment in a broader manner. That it's the story of all of us, Native Americans, who had the idea of the spirits of creation being in everything, birds and the wind and wildlife around, that we need to learn from. So many things in our technological world seem so distant from us, but they really are technological examples of what we see, I think, in the natural environment. Take this one, for instance. I read that in Tokyo, because of their concentration of population on such a small little island, they build tall buildings, and they were getting ready to make the tallest building in the world. But they're also prone to earthquakes, and earthquakes and tall buildings have a problem. And so they looked to nature for answers. And we in Indiana can identify with the answer they found: the sycamore tree. Look at the cellular structure on a sycamore tree. It isn't like an oak or maple where you cut across it and you see the top of all of those cells in order. The sycamore tree bends and it has a circular swirl to its trunk. And so the architects made that building have a stronger support because they copied that structure of a sycamore tree and made a round circular. Also heard about people who want to make a really spying equipment on something that flew in the air and said, these are so noisy. How can you be a spy if you're noisy? So they looked to the owl. The owl has wings and feathers that are appropriate for night flying and swooping in. Just keep your ears open. It's fun, if nothing more. But you will run into cases where you see, my goodness, that was a high-tech, highly developed by man's brains situation, and it was solved by looking to God's creation in nature.
does someone else have a question for Judy about social expectations or about anything that you'd like to ask about she or even the governor or whatever she remembers from her experiences then?
Well, I tell you, since Mark, you're the only one that asked a question, your friends and neighbors can look to you for good examples. And I'm on Facebook with you. And I know some people say, oh, Facebook, that's just sort of goofy stuff. Well, I'm encouraged every time I see you show vegetables. You show wonderful things in your yard. You don't get on there and say, this is just terrible. I had to do these leaves. I just hate these leaves. I'm going to cut these trees down. You show something like the grandkids playing in them, or the color and the beauty of them. Your yard looks like, and you're a good neighbor and a good family person because you do it with nature. You live with nature, not against it.
Well,
I wanted to mention, Mark, go ahead, respond if you wish.
Judy, I have to tell you though, I have 5 sycamore trees on my property, and I'm not terribly fond of them because they are very dirty trees. I think they are beautiful on a riverbank, but they really don't belong in people's yards.
I know we all face the same dilemma with everything in nature. You know, everybody has to look at their soul, look at their practical things, look at what they know scientifically, and figure out where the least harm is. Sometimes it's the least harm, but sometimes where's the best benefit that flows with all of nature. And when we realize other people just don't get stands because they're stubborn or they're going to have a profit, but that they're thinking about, and we treat them as individuals, as human beings, not as adversaries. And look at nature the same way, that we're in partnership.
Angel on me.
Adversaries. I
Mhm.
think we get along better. We have more tolerance.
May
And
not work.
Nature's pretty tolerant of us.
Say hi.
I wanted
Say
to,
something.
I wanted to add that.
Judy, Marge O'Loughlin here.
Marge, go ahead,
It's
Marge.
wonderful to
O'Loughlin.
see you.
There's
Oh,
Marge.
this is fun. They're such old, nice friends of mine.
There.
I don't mean the old, but good long time. friends.
Yes. Marge, do you have a question, Marge?
No,
wanted to
I
say-
just wanted to thank her for being here. It's so good to see you.
I wanted
hear
to say
about
that.
your marriage and
Go ahead.
hear about your philosophy. Thank you.
Well, I'm just so glad to see you. I think we're examples of how we survived. And I think one of the things we're talking about in the environment is sustainability. And you got to make compromises sometimes, don't you? And that's not a dirty word. You've been in politics, so have I. That's not a dirty word, compromise. You just figure out how between people you can satisfy their greatest need without hurting either one or harming the environment. It takes negotiation. And you know that for working on the education roundtables with Frank as governor. And you were Republican, he a Democrat. You were a wonderful example of how you disagreed on some policy, but you didn't disagree as human beings. And on other issues, you were much together. So I thank you so much for that, Marge.
I have a comment that I wanted to interject, and that is that
Thank you.
as far as giving back, I recently was in Corydon with Judy, and I saw the O'Bannon Woods State Park, which has been dedicated to the O'Bannon family. And I just wanted to thank her and her family for doing what they've done with that 3,000 acres along the Ohio River, and encourage anyone that is in the area to go visit the O'Bannon Woods State Park along the Ohio River and think about how beautiful that river is. And Judy, thank you for that as well.
Thanks for, when I spoke about the government is not the most dangerous word you ever heard. What we do live in an interconnected world, interconnected with everything. The ocean waves, the birds in the sky, and also people who speak languages we don't understand. We are all interconnected, and we sure have to figure out how to use all the resources. And it takes an organization to do that, and that's government. And so our parks, when they do those harvesting of animals, some people are just enraged. Other people say, let me shoot everything. We got to compromise that's based on science, on the community needs and the community assets, that asset management, speaking in a positive way about solving a problem, is a little more helpful in the long run than just a big grumper of the protests.
Roger Cummins had a question. What, Judy, is the most pressing environmental problem for Indiana right now, as far as, maybe you've already said climate change and jobs, but what do you think? We only have a couple minutes left. What would you do if you had the power to do something on the environment and economics in Indiana right now?
Well, I do think it's an economic, it's a social, it's a mental health issue. I think awareness that the environment is not the enemy. The environment is not just a pain in the neck that got in the way of us achieving things. It is us. We are part of it. We're fortunate to be maybe a more thinking part of it than leaves on the trees or flowers. But this is an exciting time. People are becoming aware of the value. And I think awareness of the value of people I don't think Hoosiers think enough of themselves. We ought to just be really, I think, introspective, stand up taller than I do anymore, or straighter, and look at our opportunities to improve life for all of us. It's that awareness.
Well, our time is almost up. Unless we have another comment, we're going to thank Judy and Marge and the questions that have come in and those who have watched. Mark, what is an inspiring message you want to leave with us today? Judy, what is an inspiring message for us today?
Are you talking to me? Or are you
Yes,
talking to the?
I'm talking
Well,
to you.
I'm looking at pictures here of two very inspiring people. I just think during this time where we're been so separated as people, ought to be a real wake up about how being in a community close to neighbors, all kinds of neighbors, and the diversity and the wonderness of that diversity that we find in nature. You know, we don't want to lose any species. People say, why should I care about some buffalo that lives in another country? It's because it takes all of us in an interrelated environment. And that's true in Indianapolis. It's true in Evansville. It's true in Corydon, Indiana. We've got to learn to appreciate and enjoy rather than being afraid and boxed off. That being boxed off is in a quarantine. It's just run its course with us.
As you know, Judy's done almost 100 documentaries for PBS, and I think she speaks with great experience. And we're so happy to have her with us. And thank you for all watching this today. And think about some of the things that she's talked about when you drive by a pear tree, I guess, among other things. But we're so happy to have had you, Judy, with us today.
Thank you. Well, and hang in there, even if you have to Zoom, because your organization gives you that fellowship that you know encourages and diversifies your thinking and expands your vision of what can be. So hang tough, and thanks for doing what you do.
I want to thank Kelly for getting this all video together. We had problems getting some video and audio, but we're back on track. And anything else anyone wants to say, we want to thank you all.
Yeah, on behalf of the Kiwanis Club of Indianapolis, we want to say thank you, Mrs. O'Bannon, for taking time out of your busy schedule, for joining us, and for advocating for something that you care so deeply about. Greg, thank you for making this possible, for coordinating. And as a sign of our appreciation, we'll be making a donation in your name to 913 Sports. 913 Sports serves 50,000 kids annually in the Indianapolis area schools through their innovative youth cycling program that promotes fitness and builds self-esteem. So thank you, thank you. Next week, we will be back at the Columbia Club with a visit from the Parks Alliance of Indianapolis, formerly the Indy Parks Foundation. They have a long history with our club and with our city. So I hope you guys can join us at the Columbia Club next Thursday. Until then, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye.